I'm Terry Shepard. Being a confident podcast guest is a skill that can be learned. And that's why I wrote How to Become a Dynamic Podcast Guest and Sell Stuff. It's a sweet and short primer that teaches you about the gear, the appearance, and the messaging that can grab and hold today's micro attention spans and motivate your listeners to take action. How to Become a Dynamic Podcast Guest and Sell Stuff. The digital version is just $1.99 at Amazon. Grab your copy today and sell more books tomorrow.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard, award-winning broadcaster, narrator, and author. A deep dive into the writer's craft with the artists and support systems who create the stories we love.
From a restored 200-year-old house on a small island off the coast of Maine, our John Dingle writes the kind of mysteries that seem born from fog, rock, isolation, and the secrets small towns keep buried. His critically acclaimed Gus Wheeler FBI thriller series has earned multiple award nominations, and its latest installment, Before the Devil Knows, takes readers into a chilling investigation of northern Maine. When the disfigured body of a missing teenager is discovered in an unmarked grave, FBI agent Gus Wheeler and his partner are called in. A second grave soon follows. Both victims bear the same disturbing signature, a large lead cross laid across the chest. The deeper the agents dig, the stranger the case becomes. The murders appear to have been drawn from ancient scripture. The burials reflect archaic religious practices, and a secretive church governed by a rigid interpretation of the Old Testament may be hiding more than anyone is willing to admit. John Dingle, from what I know about you, this is nothing like your real life.
Thanks for that.
What got you into this genre?
I've always read mysteries, right? I wasn't a big reader as a child, right? But then in early adulthood, I've always read mysteries. I cut my teeth on the Harry Bosch series and Harlan Coben's of the world, those in Kay Scarpetta series with Patricia Cornell, those things. So I've always read mysteries. And then when thrillers really came in, I'm like, I like that. I like knowing more than the protagonist, right? Map that with, hey, that naive, stupid comment that many people make, I can write that too. 10 years later, the first book hits the world. Yeah, it was a long road.
How did you come up with such a fascinating plot?
Over time, there's third book in the series, Before the Devil Knows. I have always wanted to write that story. I was talking to somebody recently about that. I started writing decades ago, and I've written many books that just never saw the light of day, just like practice, if you will, preseason. But that's one of the stories. There's probably 3 or 4 stories, I won't divulge the others, that I've had on a list for decades. I've wanted to write a book about a religious fanatic that adheres to the Old Testament and it's like square peg, round hole, tries to fit those ideals and views and practices and perceptions that were written thousands of years ago into today's society. Right? That's a leap. And so I've just always wanted to see how that story went.
What makes FBI agent Gus Wheeler the right character to lead readers through this investigation?
So I think he's an interesting one. I defer to some of the comments I've seen. The first book was written as a standalone thriller. Never thought that Gus would become a series type character, right? But he's modeled after one of my children. Our middle son is a professional musician, professional jazz player. And so I took some elements there, and my son Sam, and my wife came up with the idea for Gus as a character. I tried to write a book that had somebody not in law enforcement solve the crime. And I just wasn't good enough back then to get it done. I just couldn't figure out how it would get done. And so then I leaned on, I must have somebody in law enforcement. But there's been how many series written about FBI agents or whatever, right? And so when Sam and my wife came up with the idea for Gus and him being just on the cusp of breaking through as a professional musician, but needing the steady pay and needing the benefits and that, but Gus, just like my son, is severely dyslexic. He connects disparate dots, great for figuring out trends and patterns, right? So he becomes a natural FBI profiler because his brain just naturally works that way. And music infuses his view to things and the way he thinks his brain works. So Gus, to solve a crime like this, where the clues are dropped like breadcrumbs through and they're ancient Bible passages and their ancient practices with clues that come out of that and in scriptures, Gus's brain takes that and sees the little kernels of clues that they should follow to lead them through the case. So in this case, in this particular book and the others, he is the one that solves it. He's the one that gets you through.
How has he changed since book one?
Book one, he was new to the FBI, right? So he was still holding on to the fact that he could be solely a musician. Book two, so that was Karma Never Sleeps. Book two is Wings of Madness, where he goes into a very urban environment and a part of a city that's really hardcore. He gets a bit roughed up in that one. So he really faces things that this is a life. This is a different life than being a musician. And he becomes more skilled with that. He solves things there that he wouldn't have solved in the first book. And so now the third book is he's just accepted really that this is part of who he is. And he wonders at a certain point in the second book of whether he should pass this case off to somebody else because he has a big tour coming up with one of the Marsalis brothers. But he makes the conscious decision that he knows he's the one that should solve this case because he knows the killer. And so then he keeps the case. And so that gets him through. So for this case here, he's just accepted that's part of his life. His tour has now become in the background a bit. And he knows he's got to do this because lives are at stake. And he'll get to the tour, but he's reprioritized things. So his character arc has come that full sort of circle, if you will.
Our special guest is author R. John Dingle. We're talking about Before the Devil Knows. The website is rjohn, D-I-N-G-L-E, rjohndingle.com. There is something about a small town. Local residents are reluctant to cooperate with investigations. What interested you about exploring the suspicion that outsiders have in small communities?
I've lived in small towns my entire life. So I get that dynamic, right? But with this one, I started with, I wanted a church that adhered to the Old Testament. So where can that church be? It can really be anywhere. But where would it be most successful as infiltrating that community? It'd be in a community that didn't have a lot else going on. The church was the epicenter of the community. So in Upper Maine, there are many parts of Aroostook County in northern Maine, one, that are farther north in Canada, but two, that don't have power. They don't have electrical grids. They live off the grid. They live off the land. So think of a society up there largely in that sort of manner, not addicted to social media, right? They have electricity and this thing, but it's a simpler life. And many people in that simpler life stick to the church for their guidance. So that I figure that's the best place for this type of religious zealot to sit.
How do you approach portraying faith without reducing believers to stereotypes?
It's funny. So that was a concern going in, and it was a concern of my agent and of my editor and of my publisher, right? A lot of books have been written about religious practices. So I tried to say, first of all, the priest in here is modeled after a real person. So I went back to facts. I'm all in on research. I just love research. So I researched the frack out of this type of religion and what the difference is, Old Testament, New Testament, just all the different branches of Catholicism, Christianity, this and that. And I got to the point where I thought, I can tell this story where it's really a story about somebody that's not wired right, that then globs onto the religion and almost like a dog on a bumper, kind of follows the religion where they think it's going, rather than persecuting anybody that believes that particular religion, if that makes sense. So I use religion really as a tool for a demented mind to exact their form of justice that they wanted to do. So I got by that way. And it's funny, people seem to like it. Reviews are really good. But I've gotten a number of comments saying, I am religious and I don't read religious books for a reason. But I read this one, and this one was a great thriller that just happened to have religion in it. So I figure mission accomplished.
Maine's isolation, the rocky landscape, the harsh weather, they seem perfectly suited to this kind of suspense. How did you use the environment as part of the story?
Yeah, so I love that. And I've always said for a long time, there's a reason why Stephen King writes books up here, right? We live on an island off the coast of Maine. And when the fog comes in, you can picture his movie, The Mist. It is real. The stuff he writes about is drawn from real experiences. So my thought was all of these eerie vibes and saying, I'm putting them in this remote area. So there are many places where they being Gus and Vanessa, two protagonists, are trying to call back to somebody. They have no cell reception. Or they're trying to make a reference to one of the people at the church, and the people at the church, they're not on social media. So there's this fundamental disconnect and isolation that occurs. They're staying at the only motel within 100 miles. Everybody knows where they're staying. They're a target. So there's a lot that you can use with an isolated area that doesn't have to be Maine, but then you drop in some of the things that are Maine. I just think it's creepy and eerie. I just love it.
Book is Before the Devil Knows. It's written by John Dingle. rjohndingle.com is the website. What is the greatest misconception that people have about small towns?
That people in small towns are not intelligent. Like I said, I've lived in small towns my entire life. And up here, we live in a small town off the coast of Maine. I will say there are some of the wealthiest people in the state or the region up here that you'd never know. And there are some of the most intelligent people up here. And the way you know it is they don't lead with where they went to school, what they did for work, what they do for work, or how much money they have. They just be. They're very comfortable in their own skin. But I think that's the biggest misconception is I found a lot of people, especially from the city, or you get people coming up from Boston or Cambridge or whatnot, and you see them with a snarky comment or the attitude or whatever. And we're a small area up here, but that does not mean people up here are not intelligent. We've got extremely intelligent people up here. They just don't lead with it.
When I was telling folks that I was going to be interviewing you, the writers who listen to this podcast asked me to ask you, do you know the ending of the book before you begin writing?
It's so fine. So that, Terry, is the first time I've been waiting for somebody to ask me that question, right? I've done dozens of interviews. It's the first time somebody asked me that question. And much to my surprise, hell yeah, I know the ending. I know the scene. It is the straightest thing. And this isn't magic. And I'm not some writing savant, right? I bang through it like any other writer. The first book, I knew the ending. And I don't know what it is. The second book, I knew the ending. And I didn't know the story yet. I didn't even know the cast of characters, but I knew that closing scene. For some reason, I knew how I wanted to end it. This book here, I knew the story. I knew the genesis of the story. I fleshed out the characters. They usually take about a month or so to flesh out characters and backgrounds. You can get all that stuff right. And I knew the ending. I knew exactly how that book was going to end. That being said, Before the Devil Knows, at the 11th and a half hour, I changed the ending, right? It's the only one. I am 200 pages into the fourth book, and I know exactly how it's going to end. So every time now, that's the one thing I know. Before the Devil Knows, I changed the ending. My son came up with a great idea for a story arc. And so I took it back from the publisher and rewrote the last part of the ending and the epilogue and put it in. So yeah, I did know it, and I was wrong.
It happens. How do you plant clues that feel meaningful without making the solution too obvious?
I guess the easy answer is I don't know. We've all read books when it's just slapped you over the head with a clue and you're like, too obvious, right? I guess I'd take some of that as a compliment, thanks. And some of that as, if you can't tell with the planning and stuff, I outline the frack out everything, right? There's not anything that's not thought of ahead of time. And I comb through the story. So I write the story and I go back and comb through it. Even to the point where if I have a thread, I read just those chapters of the thread through the book to see how that thread goes through the book, to make sure nothing's divulged too early, too late, and it's there right at the right moment for the most intense or suspenseful moment. So I think that's a lot of it. I think it really is. I pay a lot of attention to those breadcrumbs. And when I want somebody to feel a twist, I don't want them to see it coming. So it's attention to detail is the point. Hard work.
What was the hardest scene for you to write?
In this book, it's a good question. I won't tell you the exact scene. That's a great question, Terry. You got me stumped, actually. The first one, let me just hit the high ones. The first one, easy. I think the hardest one, I'm not religious. I think the hardest scene to write was, it's going to sound benign, but was, spoiler alert, they bring in a theology expert to help them because Gus and Vanessa are just not religious, right? But they're getting Bible references and scripture and that sort of stuff. I think the hardest for me, I had to research religion and almost build like a corporate family tree of how this one related to that one and Christianity and Catholicism and this, that. So I think the hardest chapter was when that expert was describing the relationships between the different factions of the Catholic Church. I didn't know any of that. And so to learn it and to write it properly, that was probably the hardest. And it's probably a throwaway chapter. I'm sure anybody knows anything about religion is like, yeah, whatever. But to get it right is hard.
The theologian seemed to me to be a very interesting character. Did that surprise you, or were there any of the other characters in the book that turned out to surprise you?
So yes, the theologian guy he was more interesting than I thought. And one of my favorite series is the Dan Brown series. So I did not want to try to write Angels and Demons or Da Vinci Code, right? However, what I like is that he pulls in experts for the reader, which is great. It's a great writing style. I love it. So I wanted to do that here. I did that in one of the other books as well. And so he became more interesting than I thought he would have. One of the other interesting characters I personally thought was, if you read any of it, was Juju. She was a nothing character. And then I got to a certain point where I need somebody to do something. And Juju was she was up for it. And so then I went back and rewrote Juju through that different arc of the stuff. And Juju became one of my favorite characters, actually. Yeah, she was fun. She was fun to write.
Isn't that interesting how characters pop up and then all of a sudden you find yourself giving them more to do because they're so interesting?
Absolutely. Yeah, or carrying them forward. For folks that have read any of the books, in this book, one of the characters is Mulaney. And she was in the first book. She was the original protagonist of the first book that I couldn't figure out how to have her solve the crime. But she is in the series. And I love her as a character. And I didn't think she'd last, but she's lasted. Yeah.
John Dingle is our special guest. We're talking about Before the Devil Knows, the website rjohndingle.com. The title suggests that the unfamiliar threat may be more dangerous than the familiar one. What does Before the Devil Knows mean to you?
Much like the quote at the beginning of the book, it really is have as much fun as you can, but get to heaven at least 30 minutes before the devil knows. So in this case, the devil knows there's a lot going on here in the religious realm, but the reality is it's being executed right here, right in front of you. And you have to be one step ahead to get it done.
How is this one different from Karma Never Sleeps and Wings of Madness, the first two?
I've heard from others in iBlues, I feel more confident as a writer. I think the writing is better in this book. I think the pace in the other books is very good too. So probably not a pace, but I think the writing, this book at a certain point, Terry, just wrote itself. And so I think that comes through. I think there are chapters in there that are pretty complex with clues, and I think it just flows. Whereas the other books took a lot of editing to get to that level. This book there was literally no edits from the publisher on this book. It went in. The only comment they had was, there are going to be people outside of New England reading this book, and some of the characters say yeah a lot. You might want to dial it back. That was their only comment. I'm like, all right, got it. I'm on it.
You're speaking the language. It's got to be the language of the location, right? It's like Fargo. There's a lot of yeah going around.
Exactly.
You have intimated that there are more books to come in this series. What can we expect?
It was originally a 3-book deal with Thule, so Before the Devil Knows, the third book. And when I got the first draft almost done around the holidays, my editor and I were speaking, and she said that the Thule folks had wondered if I had more Gus in me. Do you think there's more in the series? And at first I said I wasn't sure. And then, as I'd mentioned earlier, my son came up with a great idea that we used Before the Devil Knows as a launch pad for a story arc for more of the story of Gus and Vanessa. And so I went back to him and said, yeah, absolutely, man. So in Feb, I signed another 3-book deal. So there'll be at least 6 books on the Gus series.
Everybody wants to know how you get published. What was your publishing journey? How'd you get it done?
A couple stats. About a year and a half plus to find an agent, 283 queries sent out, 22 full manuscripts, in addition to countless other chapters and whatevers. In the end, I had one agent come back and say, I think there's something here. Are you open to edits? And I said, sign me up. Absolutely, right? And then she liked the edits and said, my agent, Kathy Green. And she said, great, I'd love to talk to you about representation. I said, great, the book's out to another 4 or 5 other agents. So time out, you have to go back to them. Give them time, because it's not fair. Give them time, and they may come back. So they came back. I got another couple offers, but then signed with Kathy. I just liked her. She was great. So that was a year and a half plus of just getting an agent. Then to find a publisher. And so that was finding the agent was 9 months. Getting a publisher was about a year and a half. And that was a slog. I think we sent out 23, 24 submissions, which doesn't sound like a lot, but you give each of them 3 months to think about it, right? And then when my publisher came back, a different publisher came back and said, yes, we want to publish it. And then we went back to the publishers that had at the time, and Thule was one of them. And they said, whoa, time out. Our editor's on maternity leave, and this slipped through the cracks. We love it. We want it. And it was Martin Luther King, I think. It was a long weekend. And the head of the publisher called my agent and said, don't do anything before Tuesday, trying to get the staff to get an offer out. And they got an offer out and said, the only requirement we'd ask, instead of a one story book, one book, would he consider doing it a series? And they offered me a 3-book deal. So yeah, dreamland, absolute dreamland for sure.
What a long road.
It is. Yeah, it is long, but worth it, I will say. And I don't know if you're going to ask, but I will say The only piece of advice I have for authors, writers out there is sit your butt in the chair and write. I said earlier on, I've written easily 4 or 5 books that never saw the light of day, right? But it flexes your muscles. It forces you to think through, forces you to find your own voice. It forces everything. It's just practice, just preseason. But you got to do it.
What do you hope that your readers will take away from their encounter with Before the Devil Knows?
I think they'll just enjoy it. I'm not looking to cure cancer or solve the world's problems or anything like that. I'm just looking to write a book that somebody can read and have a fun time reading. So I hope they come away, and I've seen many of the reviews online will say, wow, never saw that coming. Or what, WTF? I want that reaction. I want somebody to read the book, be engaged, turn the pages, and just be surprised and love the book and have a great experience. This is fun. This isn't work. This is fun. You should enjoy this.
Kids Before the Devil Knows, written by our special guest, R. John Dingle. Call him John. R. John Dingle, DINGLE.com is the website. John, this has been fantastic. Thanks so much for the conversation.
Terry, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it. I loved it.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard is a copyrighted presentation. All rights reserved. I'm Lisa Davis. Join Terry Shepard next time in Conversation.